FactCheck.org, fact-checking the debates.
I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me.
Regarding the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, Trump baselessly claimed that he, quote, went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., unquote, Muriel Bowser, and offered to give them, quote, 10,000 National Guard or soldiers, unquote, for Capitol security. Then acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller said there was, quote, no direct order from the president, unquote, to put 10,000 National Guard troops on the ready, according to a House committee report.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Trump referred to a debunked rumor that began on Facebook alleging that immigrants in Springfield, Ohio were stealing and eating local pets. City police have said that there have been, quote, no credible reports, unquote, of that kind of activity.
My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year.
Harris claimed Trump intends to enact what in effect is a sales tax, which she said economists estimate would raise prices on typical American families by almost $4,000 a year. That's a high-end estimate from a liberal think tank about Trump's plan for universal baseline tariffs on imports.
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have and who's going to have higher prices is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years.
But Trump was also wrong when he claimed Americans would not pay higher prices due to tariffs and that the higher prices would be borne by the countries the tariffs are levied against. Many nonpartisan economists disagree about the amount that Trump's proposed tariffs would raise prices for American families, but most agree it would be substantial.
She was the emissary. They sent her in to negotiate with Zelensky and Putin, and she did. And the war started 3 days later.
Trump falsely claimed that Harris was sent, quote, to negotiate peace, unquote, between Russia and Ukraine in February 2022. Days before Russia invaded Ukraine that month, Harris met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the annual Munich Security Conference in Germany. She did not meet with Putin, as Trump said.
Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression.
Harris falsely claimed that, quote, Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression, unquote. When President Joe Biden and Harris took office in January 2021, the unemployment rate was 6.4%, lower than it was during several administrations since the 1930s.
We have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums. And they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon.
Trump repeated his unsupported claim that millions of people are, quote, pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, unquote. And he said these migrants were taking jobs from African Americans and Hispanics and also unions. Employment and union membership data show no evidence of that either.
Every legal scholar, every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote.
Trump repeated his false claim that everyone, liberals and conservatives, wanted to end Roe v. Wade's constitutional right to abortion. Experts have previously told us that Trump's claim is, quote, utter nonsense, unquote, and, quote, patently absurd, unquote. Even though some scholars have been critical of some of the legal reasoning in the decision, many did not wish to end Roe.
But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay.
The former president repeatedly said Democrats, including vice presidential candidate Tim Walz, were in favor of abortion, quote, in the 9th month, unquote, or even after birth. Abortion that late is exceedingly rare, and abortion after birth does not exist. That's homicide, and it's illegal.
understand, if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban. Understand, in his Project 2025, there would be a national abortion, a monitor that would be monitoring your pregnancies, your miscarriages.
Harris repeated the assertion that Trump, quote, will sign a national abortion ban, unquote, if elected, but Trump said that he does not intend to sign such a ban. Harris also tried to tie Trump to Project 2025's proposal for mandatory abortion reporting, but Trump has tried to distance himself from the document.
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America.
The vice president claimed Trump's economic policies led to, quote, one of the highest, unquote, trade deficits in American history, but the annual trade deficits during the Biden administration have exceeded those under Trump.
And she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one.
Trump said Harris, quote, will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania, unquote. When she was running for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, Harris did say she was, quote, in favor of banning fracking, unquote. But in an August 29th interview on CNN and at the debate, Harris said, quote, I will not ban fracking, unquote.
His plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit.
Harris claimed that Trump's tax proposal would, quote, provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit, unquote. That's the estimated 10-year cost of extending all the tax cuts in Trump's 2017 tax law, but those tax changes benefited people of all income groups.
She has a plan to confiscate everybody's gun.
Trump falsely claimed that Harris, quote, has a plan to confiscate everybody's gun, unquote. Harris has not called for taking away all guns, and her campaign said she no longer supports a mandatory buyback program for so-called assault weapons.
When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history.
Trump claimed that he had, quote, no inflation, unquote, during his presidency, while inflation experienced under Biden has been, quote, probably the worst in our nation's history, unquote. Inflation was low under Trump, but it wasn't zero, and while inflation has risen significantly under Biden, it is far below record levels.
I had a choice to make. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, or do I let it rot? And I saved it. I did the right thing.
Trump made the curious claim that he, quote, saved, unquote, the Affordable Care Act, even though he tried and failed to repeal and replace it while he was president, and he backed a lawsuit that would have nullified the law.
All over the world, crime is down, all over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But
Excuse me, the FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud. Just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
The former president wrongly claimed that, quote, crime in this country is through the roof, unquote, and that FBI data to the contrary is a fraud because, quote, they didn't include the cities with the worst crime, unquote. The latest FBI statistics are based on voluntary reporting from a higher participation of cities than any year during Trump's presidency. Trump also falsely claimed that the number of jobs created during the Biden administration, quote, turned out to be a fraud, unquote. The Bureau of Labor Statistics announced a downward revision in the jobs tally during its routine annual revision of jobs data. You can read our full debate coverage available now at our website, factcheck.org.